About 4 years ago, I had a short-lived job at a supermarket chain. It was during part of the summer, and honestly, I only lasted about a month before I quit. Out of all the jobs I've ever had, that one holds the record for being the briefest, and for good reason. It just wasn't for me. The only reason I even took it was because I desperately needed the money at the time. Shortly after starting, they stationed me near the self-checkout area. My job was basically to hover around, keep an eye on things, and help customers whenever they ran into problems. And there were always problems: items not scanning, unexpected items in the bagging area, customers accidentally double scanning things. It was repetitive but simple enough. One night, I was scheduled to work until closing, which was 11 p.m. By around 9:30 or maybe closer to 10, I'd already been on my feet for hours. The self-checkout area was nearly full. I think there were 8 machines in total, though one was out of order, leaving 7 active registers. I stood in my usual spot, tucked into the corner, quietly observing the area. That's when I noticed a guy giving me an odd look. First as he walked by, and again as he made his way to one of the self-checkout stations. He looked to be in his late 30s, wearing a dark hoodie and carrying a basket packed with items. I watched him carefully. The man scanned a single item, placed it in a bag, then dropped the bag back into his basket. He repeated the process with one more item, and that was it. 2 items scanned, bagged, and paid for. But I clearly saw him stuffing several more items into his bags without scanning them. Frustration bubbled up inside me. It was obvious what he was trying to do, just blatantly walk out with stolen merchandise. As he casually walked away from the checkout area, I followed, catching up to him just before he reached the exit. "You need to scan all your items," I told him firmly. "Not just those 2. The man stopped, a look of mock surprise spreading across his face, quickly replaced by anger. He glared at me and snapped, "Are you accusing me of stealing? I haven't even left the store yet." Before I could respond, he grabbed his 2 bags and hurled them onto a nearby candy display that was set up near the exit. "Fine. I don't want anything from this place anyway," he spat, then stormed out the door, leaving the bags sitting on top of the discounted candy. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to make of the entire exchange. Eventually, I shrugged it off and went back to my station. The rest of the night passed without incident. When the store finally closed, I clocked out, grabbed my stuff, and headed outside. The parking lot was nearly deserted, the bright overhead lights casting long shadows across the asphalt. The quiet of the lot only made everything feel more unsettling. As I reached my car and climbed inside, a sudden burst of bright light hit me directly in the face. Startled, I looked up to see a vehicle parked right in front of mine. Its headlights, high beams, flared on at the exact moment I sat down. Then I heard a car door slam shut, and my heart sank. The same man from earlier was now approaching my driver's side window. His expression was hard to read, but his clenched jaw and tense body language sent every alarm in my brain blaring. He knocked on the window, his face illuminated by the harsh headlights. "I want to talk to you," he demanded, his tone sharp and aggressive. "Get out of the car." Every instinct screamed at me to stay put. Cautiously, I cracked the window just enough to speak. "Why?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just get out," he snapped, cursing under his breath. Without waiting for an answer, he reached for the door handle. Thankfully, I had locked the doors just in time. His frustration boiled over as he stormed to the front of my car and kicked near the headlight, the sound echoing through the empty lot. That was enough for me. I threw the car into reverse, backed up as quickly as I could, and sped out of the parking lot. My heart was pounding the entire way home. Thankfully, the man didn't follow me, but that night shook me more than I cared to admit. After that, I seriously considered quitting. The very next day, I applied for a different job, and within a week, I handed in my resignation. Looking back, I know I made the right call. That job wasn't worth the risk, and that night easily confirmed it. Before we proceed, please let us know where you're from. Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel and be a part of our small community. Let's continue. Over the years, I've had my fair share of weird encounters at supermarkets, but this one still ranks near the top of the creepiest. To this day, I have no idea how that man figured out which car was mine, or why he waited for me to leave the store. but I'm honestly just relieved I never had to find out the hard way. This happened a couple of years ago. For context, I'm female, and at the time, I was living alone in a small apartment complex not far from a nearby supermarket, only about a 5-minute drive away. It was close, convenient, and I'd made quick trips there dozens of times, usually without giving it a second thought. That night, it was a bit later than I usually went shopping, but I only needed a few grocery items, so I didn't see any harm. I left my apartment, drove over, and parked out front. The store wasn't exactly deserted, but it wasn't busy either. A few scattered shoppers milled about, and the aisles were mostly quiet. I grabbed a basket and made my way through a few aisles, casually browsing. That's when I noticed him. I was standing in a grocery aisle, reaching for something on the shelf, when a man snuck up behind me. He looked about 20 years older than me, with short, thinning hair and a scruffy goatee. There was something immediately unsettling about him. Maybe it was the way he hovered so close, or how I never heard him approach. Suddenly, he greeted me, his voice uncomfortably close to my ear. I jumped, startled by how near he was. He smiled, called me cute, and immediately asked for my phone number. Caught off guard, I told him no thanks and lied, saying I had a boyfriend, even though I didn't. I just wanted him to leave me alone without making a scene. But the man didn't get the hint. He pressed further, insisting we could still hang out, and asked for my number again. My discomfort grew with every word. I told him firmly I wasn't interested, and that I had to go. I quickly turned and walked into the next aisle, putting some distance between us. But barely 10 seconds later, I saw him follow me into the aisle. My heart sank. He approached again, trying to strike up conversation as if nothing was wrong. This time, I told him flat out to leave me alone. The situation was quickly becoming more than just annoying. It was starting to feel threatening. Thankfully, at that moment, another shopper entered the aisle. He must have overheard what was happening, because he walked right up and confronted the man, telling him to back off. The creep immediately became defensive, telling the other guy to mind his own business. The two exchanged some heated words, but eventually, the man finally walked off. I was beyond grateful to the stranger who stepped in. He told me he hoped the guy wouldn't bother me again, and then he went on his way. I decided it was time to wrap things up fast. I returned to the aisle I'd originally been in, grabbed the rest of the items I needed, then headed to the self-checkout. Within 5 minutes, I had paid and was walking toward the exit. But the moment I stepped outside, my heart dropped. There he was, the same man, standing just outside the entrance on the sidewalk, casually smoking a cigarette. As soon as he spotted me, he started walking toward me, not saying a word, but his intent was clear. I picked up my pace, heading straight for my car. But I could tell he was going to follow me the whole way. Halfway across the lot, I stopped abruptly and turned to face him. I told him loud and clear to leave me alone, or I'd call the police. For a moment, he acted all innocent, throwing his hands up and claiming he wasn't doing anything wrong. I didn't bother arguing. Instead, I turned and sprinted for my car, my pulse racing. I had already unlocked the door as I approached, so I jumped inside, slammed the door shut, and locked it just as he reached my vehicle. He grabbed the door handle, tried to open it, then started pounding on the window in frustration. I threw the car into reverse and sped out of the lot, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The man actually tried to chase after my car for a few steps, which only added to how surreal the whole thing felt. Once I was safely away, I called the police and reported what happened. I'm sure the guy vanished from the scene the second I was gone. Thankfully, he didn't follow me any further. After that, I avoided that supermarket for a long time. Eventually, I did go back, and nothing like that has happened since. I've never seen that man again, and hopefully never will. Looking back, I'm really glad I stopped, confronted him, and then ran for it. Sure, there was a risk in stopping. If he'd tried to grab me, I would have been in trouble, but I truly believe if I'd just casually walked to my car, he might have caught up with me before I could even get inside. If there's one thing I took from that night, it's this: always be aware of your surroundings, especially when you're out shopping late. That was, without a doubt, the scariest experience I've ever had at a supermarket. This happened a little while back on a quiet Sunday morning. It was around 7:30 a.m. when I decided to head to the supermarket to do some shopping. I specifically chose that early hour to avoid the inevitable weekend crowds. The aisles would be packed by midday, and I wanted to get in and out without the chaos. When I arrived, the parking lot was nearly empty, just a few scattered cars. I grabbed a cart, headed inside, and began making my way through the store. It was calm, just how I hoped, only a handful of shoppers roaming around. Everything felt normal, at first. But when I reached the dish soap aisle, that's when things started to feel off. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a heavy-set man sitting oddly near the edge of the aisle. He wasn't shopping, he wasn't browsing. He was just sitting there, practically parked on the floor, staring directly at me. It immediately struck me as strange. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just resting or waiting for someone. I grabbed what I needed and moved on, not thinking much more of it. But as I pushed my cart into the next aisle, I realized he had gotten up and was now following me, keeping about 20 feet of distance, but still trailing me. At first, I thought maybe it was just a coincidence. But no matter where I went, down different aisles, changing direction, he was always there, lingering a few steps behind like a shadow. It didn't take long for that creeping feeling of unease to settle in. I tried to act natural, ignoring him as best I could, but every time I glanced over my shoulder, there he was, still following, silent, watching, unnervingly persistent. Minutes dragged by like hours as I finished up my shopping, my nerves on edge the entire time. The store was still quiet. No one else seemed to notice him, only me. When I was done, I headed to the self-checkout area, planning to tell one of the employees about the man. But when I got there and quickly glanced behind me, he was gone. Relief washed over me. Maybe he finally gave up and left. I scanned my items, paid, and made my way toward the exit. As I stepped into the parking lot, the morning sunlight now brighter, I started walking to my car. I usually park toward the back where there's more space. But when I got within about 50 feet of my vehicle, my heart dropped. The man was there. He was standing roughly 10 feet in front of my car, staring at me, completely still, like he'd been waiting. His eyes locked onto mine, cold and unwavering. I had no idea how he knew which car was mine. The surrounding parking spaces were empty. No one else parked near me. It was almost like he'd been watching me all along, waiting for this moment. I froze for a second, unsure what to do. His eyes never left mine. I considered turning around, going back into the store, but something inside me told me to stay calm and keep moving. I walked toward my car, slow and steady, ready to bolt if he made a move. But he didn't. Even as I reached my car, opened the door, and climbed inside, he stood there, unmoving, staring at me. The entire time I started my engine, he didn't blink, didn't look away. I backed out of the space and pulled out of the lot, his eyes following me until I was gone. That was the last time I ever saw him, and to this day, that remains the creepiest, most unsettling experience I've ever had at a supermarket. I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't noticed him, or if I hadn't left when I did. A few months ago, I had one of the creepiest experiences of my life, and it all started at the grocery store I visit practically every other day. I work a pretty typical office job, 5 days a week. Nothing special, but I've always loved to cook. Making dinner for myself almost every night is like my little daily routine. I find it relaxing. To keep my meals fresh, I usually stop for ingredients on my way home from work. There's a supermarket about a mile from my apartment, and since they tend to have the lowest prices, I go there all the time for produce, meat, and whatever else I need. The story takes place on one of those usual after-work grocery runs. I typically finish work anywhere between 3 o'clock and 4 p.m., so I'd hit the store shortly after that. The place was always moderately busy, never packed, but never empty either. One afternoon, while I was browsing the produce section, a store employee greeted me. I didn't think much of it at the time, but the next time I went shopping, I noticed he was there again. And he greeted me a second time, this time starting a little casual conversation. Looking back, I'd never really paid attention to the employees before. But now that I did, I noticed he was a stocky guy, bald with a small, dark beard. He came off as friendly, harmless even. We chatted briefly, just small talk, before I excused myself and finished my shopping. Over the next couple of weeks, it became a regular thing. Every time I stopped at the store, he'd find me, usually near the produce section, and spark up conversation. At first, I didn't mind, he seemed nice enough. But with each interaction, his questions started getting more personal. Where I worked, if I lived nearby, whether I lived alone, little things that started to set off quiet alarms in my head. I kept brushing it off, telling myself he was probably just a friendly guy trying to make conversation. But one day things escalated. I was in the middle of my usual grocery run when I saw him again. Same friendly opening, asking how my day was, but this time he asked for my phone number. Caught off guard, I politely declined. I didn't want to be rude, but I also didn't want him getting the wrong idea. Honestly, the more I thought about it, the weirder it felt. Come to think of it, I never actually saw him working. He always seemed to be lingering around, waiting to approach me. The moment I said no, his whole demeanor changed. His smile faded, his posture stiffened, and without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there mid-sentence. I shook it off, finished my shopping, and didn't see him again in the store. About 10 minutes later, I paid for my items and headed out to my car. That day, I'd parked toward the back of the lot, away from most of the other vehicles. As I approached my car, I noticed another car parked a few spaces away, and sitting inside was the same man. I still don't know how I noticed him so quickly, but I'm grateful I did. At first, I thought maybe he was on break, or just finished his shift. He wasn't looking at me, which eased my nerves for a moment. I started my car and backed out, but as I pulled out of the lot, I saw him do the same, following right behind me. At first, I told myself it was a coincidence, but with every turn I made, the exact same ones he took, my heart started pounding harder. Less than 2 minutes later, I was pulling into my apartment complex, and he was still right behind me. Panic set in. I was almost certain this man didn't live here. I circled around the parking lot, pretending to look for a space, but really I was stalling, watching him trail my car the entire time. Realizing he wasn't going to stop, I made a quick decision. I wasn't staying here. I pulled out of the complex and headed down a quiet side street that led to a main road. It was rush hour now, almost 5 p.m., so traffic was heavy. With the man still behind me, I waited for the perfect moment, a small gap in traffic, and then pulled out, cutting in close in front of an approaching car. The driver honked, but I didn't care. The man following me never got the chance to merge. I sped off, watching in my rearview mirror as his car was stuck at the side street, unable to follow. That's when anger replaced the fear. I turned the car around and drove straight back to the store. Fuming, I marched inside and headed straight to customer service. I explained everything, how an employee had followed me home, how he'd been hanging around me for weeks. But when they asked for a description, and I told them, their response chilled me to the bone. They told me no one matching that description worked there. Not in produce, not anywhere. It hit me. The man had probably just put on a store vest. Maybe he used to work there. Maybe he bought it online. Who knows? But he wasn't part of their staff. They assured me they'd keep an eye out for him. But honestly, that didn't do much to calm my nerves. I carefully drove home, scanning every car, every shadow. Luckily, I never saw him again, not that day, not since. But knowing he never worked there in the first place, that's what still keeps me up at night. Just a few weeks ago, I had one of the strangest, most unsettling encounters I've ever experienced while shopping. And honestly, I still can't figure out what that guy's deal was. It happened during a routine evening trip to the supermarket. It wasn't even that late, around 8 p.m. I only needed to grab a few items, so I figured I'd be in and out quickly. The store seemed pretty normal when I walked in. It wasn't packed, but it wasn't dead quiet either, just a few other shoppers scattered around. I grabbed a cart and headed down the right side of the store to grab some soap, the first thing on my short list. As I made my way down the aisle, I passed a man walking in the opposite direction. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe just under 6 feet, stocky build, with somewhat long dark hair. But what really caught my eye was his shirt. Across the front, in big bold letters, it read, "Human Mammal." It was odd, but I brushed it off. People wear weird shirts all the time. I grabbed the soap and continued my shopping. I headed toward the back of the store to get the last few things on my list. It took me maybe 5 or 6 minutes to grab everything, and then I made my way toward the front to check out. That's when things got weird. About halfway to the front, the store became noticeably quiet in that section. No shoppers, no employees in sight, just one figure standing in a random aisle. It was the human mammal guy. He wasn't shopping. He wasn't browsing. He was standing there, facing a shelf, casually pushing items onto the floor, like he was deliberately making a mess. I slowed down, watching him for a moment. At first, I considered walking right past him, but curiosity got the better of me. When I got a little closer, I stopped and asked, "What are you doing?" I wasn't angry, and I didn't sound like an employee or anything. I was just genuinely confused. The man looked right at me as I spoke, but he didn't stop. He simply kept knocking items off the shelf, his expression blank. I glanced around, hoping to spot an employee, but the aisle was empty. When I turned back to him, he casually flipped me off, expressionless, like it meant nothing. I debated saying something back, but decided against it. Someone would see what he was doing soon enough, and it wasn't worth the confrontation. I kept walking, made my way to the self-checkouts, scanned my items, and paid. I figured that was the end of the weird encounter, but I was wrong. As I walked through the parking lot toward my car, I had this strange feeling, a quiet little instinct, to glance over my shoulder. And there he was. The human mammal guy was following me. He was about 50 feet back, walking slowly, but his eyes were fixed directly on me. At first, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe he just happened to be leaving at the same time. Maybe I was overthinking it, but his stare said otherwise. I made it to my car, unlocked it, and got inside. I wasn't rushing, not yet, but as I started the engine and glanced in the rearview mirror, I froze. He had followed me all the way to my car and was now standing directly behind it, staring at me through the back window. I waited for him to move. He didn't budge. His face was expressionless, like he wasn't even fully present. After nearly a minute of this eerie standoff, I rolled down my window and yelled for him to move. He ignored me completely. I honked my horn, still nothing. His calm, unbothered demeanor was more unsettling than if he'd been yelling or banging on my car. Not knowing what else to do, I turned off the engine and got out. I kept my distance. He seemed unpredictable, and I didn't want to get too close. "What's your problem?" I asked firmly, but again, no response. He just stared at me like I wasn't even there. It was at that point I decided to head back toward the store. As I made my way across the parking lot, I could hear his footsteps behind me, steady, measured, following me again. By the time I reached the entrance, he was only about 10 feet back. Once inside, I wasn't sure where to go. I walked past the self-checkouts, scanning the area. That's when I noticed a few employees standing nearby. The man followed me in, still trailing close behind, but one of the employees stepped in front of him. It turns out, someone must have reported him. Maybe they saw him knocking things off shelves, or maybe he'd been spotted on security cameras. Either way, the employees weren't letting him wander freely anymore. I didn't stick around to see what happened next. While they distracted him, I turned and quickly slipped out of the store. This time, he wasn't able to follow me. I made it to my car, left the parking lot, and never saw him again. I can only hope they banned him from the store, or that security dealt with him properly. Whatever his intentions were, it felt like he was there to cause trouble. And for me, that was the last time I ever underestimated the weirdos lurking at the grocery store. Hey everyone, I've been a long-time follower of this channel and have watched plenty of the Walmart stories you've shared over the years. I never thought I'd have my own experience to add, but just a few weeks ago, something happened that I still can't stop thinking about. It was a typical evening. I needed to grab some groceries, so I headed to my usual supermarket. It was around 8 p.m., not too late, but definitely past peak shopping hours. The store wasn't empty, but it wasn't crowded either. A handful of other people were scattered around, quietly browsing. I grabbed a cart and started walking toward the opposite side of the store from the grocery section. I figured I'd save my actual grocery shopping for last. As I made my way down the aisles, I passed by a few other shoppers, but one person in particular stood out. It was a man. Something about him felt oddly familiar, but not in a "hey, I know that guy" sort of way. More like I'd seen him somewhere before, but couldn't quite place it. He had longer dark hair, an average height, a stocky build, but it wasn't his face that triggered my memory. It was his shirt. Across the front, in big letters, it read, "Human Mammal." I kept walking, racking my brain, trying to remember where I'd seen that shirt before. It wasn't until later that it clicked, but in that moment, I just kept going, leaving him behind. After grabbing a few other things, I made my way to the back corner of the store to get food for my dog. That part of the store was eerily quiet, no other shoppers, no employees in sight. I was scanning the shelves when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and there he was, the human mammal guy. The moment I saw him standing there, staring at me, it hit me. I remembered seeing someone wearing that exact shirt in one of those Walmart horror stories I watched on this channel. I'd never seen anyone wearing that shirt before, let alone acting so strange. He stood there, unmoving, eyes fixed on me. Trying to keep things from escalating, I smiled politely and said hello. He didn't respond. Instead, he took a couple of slow steps toward me, still staring. Then, just as suddenly, he turned around and walked out of the aisle. I stayed put for another minute, giving him plenty of space, then cautiously moved along to another part of the store to finish my shopping. A few aisles over, it happened again. I heard footsteps approaching and turned to see him entering the aisle. This time, he grabbed the first item off the shelf and casually tossed it onto the floor. But that wasn't what made my stomach twist with fear. In his other hand, the one hidden behind him, he was holding a small hammer. My heart dropped. He just stood there, gripping the hammer loosely by his side, staring at me with that same blank, unsettling expression. Trying to keep calm, I asked him what he was doing, still trying to sound friendly, hoping to defuse the situation. He didn't say a word. Instead, he took a few slow steps toward me. I told him he was making me nervous with that hammer. Still silence. At that point, I wasn't sticking around to see what happened next. I quickly angled my cart across the width of the aisle, creating a makeshift barrier between us, then turned and sprinted toward the other end. As I rounded the corner, I heard his footsteps rushing in the opposite direction, running out of the aisle. I didn't stop. I bolted along the back wall of the store until I spotted an employee stocking shelves. Breathless, I rushed over and explained that there was a man wandering around with a hammer, acting really strange. She seemed alarmed and radioed someone immediately. I took that as my cue to leave. I cautiously made my way to the front of the store, constantly scanning the aisles, but thankfully, I didn't see him again. I quickly checked out and walked to my car, adrenaline still racing through my system. As I was loading my groceries into the back, I noticed two police cars pulling up to the entrance of the store. They parked along the curb, lights flashing, officers stepping out. I didn't stick around, but I was almost certain they were there for him, the human mammal guy. When I got home that night, I rewatched that old Walmart horror story, the one with the guy wearing the same shirt. The behavior, the shirt, it all matched. And I remembered that in that story, he'd supposedly been banned from another Walmart. So either this was a different location, or he came back anyway. I still can't believe it happened, but I had to share. Hopefully, that guy doesn't cause any more problems for anyone else. This unsettling experience happened to me just a few months ago while I was out shopping at my neighborhood Superstore. I'm a young woman in my mid-20s, and there's a large discount store barely a 10-minute drive from where I live. One evening after work, I decided to stop by because I needed to replace my wireless earbuds. They had suddenly stopped working earlier that week. It was already dark outside by the time I pulled into the parking lot, and the store itself was unusually quiet for that hour. I figured that worked in my favor. Less people, faster in and out. I grabbed a cart and headed towards the middle section of the store where the electronics department usually is. The place felt a little too empty, but I brushed it off. As I made my way down one of the wide aisles, I suddenly realized I needed to use the restroom. I remembered that most of these stores have bathrooms tucked away towards the back, usually quieter and less crowded than the ones at the front entrance. Without thinking much of it, I kept walking in that direction. Sure enough, I found the restrooms down a dim side hallway. I pushed open the door and went inside. The space was empty, with a faint buzzing of overhead lights filling the silence. I slipped into one of the stalls, locking the door behind me. Barely a minute had passed when I heard the faint sound of the bathroom door creaking open. Heavy footsteps followed, moving quickly across the tiled floor. I froze. The steps stopped directly outside my stall. From beneath the door, I caught a glimpse of large, worn-looking shoes, clearly a man's shoes. My heart skipped. Through the small crack in the door, I couldn't see much of him, but then I heard it, a whisper. It was low, raspy, unmistakably a man's voice. He whispered, "Will you let me in?" My stomach turned with disgust. I firmly said, "No," but he didn't leave. Instead, he asked again, this time with a faint, unsettling chuckle. Suddenly, the door handle rattled as he tried to open it, but thankfully the lock held. My voice was sharper now as I told him to go away, doing my best to sound calm despite the fear creeping up my spine. After what felt like an eternity, I finally heard him retreat. His heavy footsteps echoed as he walked out of the bathroom. I sat frozen for a few seconds longer before rushing out. My pulse was racing as I stepped back into the store. Conveniently, the restrooms were right by the electronics department, so I decided to quickly grab the headphones I needed and leave. I spotted the ones I wanted, the exact same model as my old pair, but they were locked inside a glass case. Looking around for assistance, I noticed an employee standing behind the electronics counter. As I walked up to him, I couldn't help but notice his shoes. They were the same large, worn shoes I had seen under the bathroom stall door. A chill shot through me. Trying not to show how unnerved I was, I asked him to unlock the case. He grabbed the keys and walked over, all the while I could feel my skin crawling. As soon as he handed me the headphones, I thanked him and quickly walked off, putting as much distance between us as possible. I went straight to the front, paid for my purchase, and hurried out to my car. Once I was safely inside with the doors locked, I called the store and reported the incident. I never found out if that man faced any consequences, because I avoided that store entirely after that night. It wasn't until a few weeks ago that I finally went back out of necessity, but when I did, he was nowhere to be seen. A few years back, I used to work at a big retail store as a cashier. I was still in school at the time, so I only worked part-time, mostly nights or weekends to fit around my classes. It wasn't the most exciting job, but it paid the bills, and most of the time, things were pretty routine. One Saturday afternoon, I was scheduled for a long shift, starting midday and running until about 10 p.m. Those were my usual hours back then. The store was packed, with constant streams of customers lining up at the registers. It wasn't unusual. Saturdays were always busy. At one point, a man came through my lane holding one of the more expensive wireless speakers we sold. It had a hefty price tag, over $100. As soon as I rang it up and gave him the total, his expression soured. He immediately started arguing, insisting the speaker was supposed to be on sale, half off, according to him. I politely told him I hadn't seen any sale signs for that item, but to be sure, I called for someone from the electronics department to double-check. My coworker, Daniel, came over after a minute or two. I explained the situation, and after a quick look, he confirmed what I already suspected. The speaker wasn't on sale and never had been since we'd stocked it. It was obvious the guy was trying to bluff his way into a discount, but instead of accepting that, he kept complaining louder now. He refused to pay and held up my entire line for over 5 minutes. The customers behind him were growing impatient, and honestly, so was I. I kept my cool for as long as I could, calmly asking him to either pay or step aside. That's when things got personal. He started hurling insults at me, calling me useless, stupid, and worse. I've always been a patient person, and working retail, you develop a thick skin. But something about this guy, his attitude, his face, it rubbed me the wrong way from the moment he opened his mouth. Finally, after he called me an idiot for the 3rd time, I told him to leave my lane. That seemed to flip a switch in him. He cursed me out one last time, his eyes full of anger, and stormed off. I was honestly relieved to see him go. I figured that was the end of it. The rest of my shift was pretty standard. Hours passed, the crowd thinned, and by the time nighttime rolled around, I had almost forgotten about the guy. That is, until I looked up and saw him again. He was standing in line, just a few customers away, and my stomach sank. His appearance was exactly the same: long scruffy beard, dark sunglasses, and a red hoodie pulled over his head. But this time, there was no item in his hands. He wasn't here to buy anything. The line moved forward, and eventually it was his turn. He stepped up to my register, leaned in slightly, and with a smirk said, "You didn't think I'd come back, did you?" I didn't respond. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face neutral. He stared at me for a second longer before his expression hardened. "You better start watching your back," he muttered, then casually walked away like nothing had happened. I stood there frozen for a moment, processing what he said. The interaction left me on edge, but I forced myself to focus and finish my shift. An hour later, my shift finally ended. I was more than ready to go home and forget the whole situation. The store was quiet now, most of the customers gone, the parking lot nearly empty. As usual, I had parked in the far back corner where there was plenty of space. As I approached my car, I heard someone shout from about 30 feet to my left. My heart skipped a beat. I turned my head and saw him, the same man, standing beside a car partially hidden behind a tree. Before I could react, he cursed at me and started walking towards me with purpose. I barely had time to think. The moment his steps quickened, so did mine. I sprinted for my car, fumbling with my keys as I heard his footsteps pounding the pavement behind me. The second I got inside, I slammed the door shut, locked it, and started the engine. That's when I heard a loud thud. He had kicked the side of my car hard. I didn't waste another second. I threw the car in reverse and sped off as fast as I could, watching him shrink in the rearview mirror. Luckily, he couldn't get back to his vehicle in time to follow me. When I finally got home, I was still shaking. I stepped out and saw a noticeable dent on the side of my car where he'd kicked it. I couldn't believe how far this man had gone over a stupid argument at the register. The next day, I went back to work and told the store manager everything that had happened. I decided on the spot to quit. It wasn't worth the risk, not with someone like that knowing where I worked and what time I got off. Thankfully, the store was understanding. They even covered the cost to repair my car. But even now, years later, I still get nervous in parking lots at night, because you never really know what kind of people are out there, or how far they're willing to go over something as simple as being told no. This happened several years ago, but the memory still creeps me out to this day. Back then, I used to shop at those big all-in-one stores pretty often. They had everything you could possibly need, and since they were everywhere, it was always my go-to spot whenever I needed groceries or supplies. At one point, I had to travel out of town for a work conference. It was a week-long event, nearly 10 hours away from where I lived. After the conference wrapped up, I packed my bags and hit the road, ready for the long drive home. I had planned to push through the night and drive straight back. But around the halfway mark, it got late, and my car's gas gauge was running low. I figured it was smarter to stop now rather than risk getting stranded somewhere along those dark, empty highways. I took the next exit I could find, and pulled into a small gas station to fill up. The place was quiet, eerily quiet. The attached convenience store was dark and locked up for the night, and the little town itself looked nearly deserted. It was one of those small towns you pass by, without even remembering the name. But as I looked around, I spotted a familiar sight across the street, a Walmart. Well, sort of. It didn't look like your typical Walmart. The building was smaller, older, almost like it had been some other store in a previous life, and was awkwardly converted into a Walmart later. The parking lot was practically empty, maybe 2 or 3 cars at most, which felt strange but not totally unexpected given how late it was. Curious, I pulled out my phone and checked Google Maps just to be sure. It said they were open. That surprised me considering it was close to midnight, but I shrugged it off and decided to head inside. I was starving and figured I'd grab some snacks for the rest of the drive. As I stepped through the automatic doors, the place felt off. The inside did have the usual Walmart look, the same fluorescent lighting, the same aisles, but it was all scaled down. The layout was odd, tighter than usual, and the whole space just felt older, like it hadn't been properly updated in years. I wandered around, not exactly sure what I wanted, just something to eat. But as I walked the aisles, I realized I hadn't seen a single other person. No customers, no employees. The entire store was dead silent, except for the faint hum of the lights above. I tried to brush off the weird feeling creeping over me. It was a small town, after all. Probably just a skeleton crew working the night shift, maybe hiding in the back stocking shelves. I made my way to one of the back aisles, still browsing, when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. From the far end of the aisle, someone appeared. They were wearing one of those full-head horse masks, the goofy, rubbery kind with the exaggerated features. It startled me at first, but after a second, I let out a nervous laugh. Must have been some local pulling a prank. The guy just stood there, staring at me through those hollow, cartoonish eyes, then silently turned and walked away. I shook my head, amused but still a little on edge. Eventually, I grabbed a few things and headed towards the front of the store. As I walked, another person passed by, also wearing a horse mask. I figured they were probably in on the same joke, friends messing around. But when I reached the self-checkout area, my unease returned. Two more people stepped out from behind one of the empty checkout lanes. Both of them horse masks. This time, it didn't feel funny at all. A rush of fear spread through me. My eyes darted around the store, the two I had just seen, the other one somewhere in the aisles, and not a single employee in sight. They all stood there, perfectly still, watching me. Trying not to show how rattled I was, I scanned my items and paid, all while feeling their eyes, or rather, those lifeless plastic eyes locked onto me. I grabbed my bag, printed my receipt, and headed straight for the exit, resisting the urge to sprint. The night air outside felt thick and still. The parking lot was just as empty as before, except for one new car, parked directly next to mine. My heart sank. I kept my eyes forward, walking briskly to my car, forcing myself not to look around. I unlocked the door, slid inside, and as I shut it behind me, I finally glanced at the car parked beside mine. At first, it looked empty, but then slowly, a horse mask popped up from the driver's seat. I froze for a split second, my heart hammering in my chest, before slamming my foot on the gas. My tires screeched as I sped out of that parking lot, back onto the highway, leaving that eerie little town behind me. I didn't stop again until I made it all the way home the next day. Even now, I still wonder what was going on in that bizarre, quiet Walmart, and who, or what, those people were. I used to work at a Walmart. It definitely wasn't my dream job by any means, but I didn't hate it either. It paid the bills, and for the most part, the work was simple. Most of my shifts were after hours, late into the night, when the store was either closed to customers or nearly empty. I usually worked in the back of the store, organizing stock, sorting boxes, and bringing items out to the shelves. I worked in pretty much every section over time, so I knew the place like the back of my hand. By the time this particular incident happened, I'd been there for about 6 months. Long enough to get familiar, but apparently not long enough to expect what was coming. It was a weeknight, probably just past midnight. I was a few hours into my shift, working alone in the back storage area. The place was quiet, just the usual low hum of the building and the occasional rattle from the ventilation system. That's when I heard it. A loud thud echoed from somewhere nearby in the storage area. It wasn't faint or distant, it was close. Close enough that it made me jump. I froze for a second, scanning the shelves and stacks of boxes around me. But I couldn't see anything out of place. What made it even stranger was the fact that nobody else was supposed to be back there. At that hour, most employees were out on the sales floor, and I hadn't seen anyone come through the back in a while. I tried to shake it off, chalking it up to some box falling over, or maybe a cart shifting somewhere. I finished what I was doing and brought a load of products out to the shelves, but the whole time, I couldn't shake that uneasy feeling. About 15 minutes later, I was back in the same area of the storage room, grabbing more stock. And that's when I heard the noise again, another loud thud, almost identical to the first one. This time, my skin prickled with nerves. I paused, straining to pinpoint exactly where the sound was coming from, but it was impossible to tell. The back area of the store was like a maze, rows of metal shelves stacked high with boxes, carts, and equipment everywhere. If someone wanted to hide back there, it wouldn't be hard. The noise came again. Another solid, heavy thud. I stood up, determined to find the source. I cautiously walked toward the direction I thought the sound had come from, calling out softly, "Is somebody back here?" But there was no reply. The only sound was the faint hum of the store's lights above me. The silence after my voice faded was almost worse than the noise itself. I scanned the aisles, shelves, and corners, but there was nothing. No one. Eventually, I gave up and returned to my work, trying to shake off the unease. But the whole time I was in that back room, I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder. I finished up as fast as I could, and went back out to the store. But as the night dragged on, I kept having to return to the back for more items. The uneasy feeling never left me. Later that night, closer to 2 a.m., I had to go back into the same storage area yet again. I hadn't even been back there for 10 minutes when it happened. Another thud, louder this time and closer. My heart jumped in my chest. Enough was enough. I bolted toward the sound, calling out, "Who's there? What's going on?" My footsteps echoed between the shelves as I hurried through the narrow aisles, but once again, nothing. It was impossible to tell exactly where the noise had come from. The endless rows of towering shelves stretched in every direction, creating shadows and hiding spots everywhere. I slowed my steps, creeping down one of the narrower aisles, peeking around cautiously. That's when I heard it. A whisper. It wasn't a thud or a crash this time. It was a low, unsettling whisper, coming from the next aisle over. Hey you." The voice was quiet, but crystal clear. And it was right there, only a few feet away. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran, sprinting straight out of the storage area and back onto the sales floor. My heart was pounding, my skin cold with fear. The first employee I spotted must have seen the look on my face, because he immediately asked what was wrong. I tried to explain, stumbling over my words, but he could tell I was shaken. Without hesitation, he offered to come check it out with me. I felt a little braver with someone else by my side, but when we searched the storage area together, nothing. No noises, no people, no signs of anyone hiding back there. The rest of my shift dragged by, my nerves on edge the entire time. Nothing else happened, but the silence was almost worse. I never found out who, or what, was hiding back there. My best guess is someone sneaked in before closing and decided to mess with me. But why? And how long had they been hiding there? A few weeks later, I quit that job. To be honest, I'd been considering it for a while, but that night sealed the deal. And to this day, I still wonder who was whispering to me in the dark. This happened just last year, and it still sends chills down my spine when I think about it. I had worked an unusually late shift that night, well past 1 a.m., and by the time I clocked out, I realized I was low on groceries. I wasn't tired yet, and with everything else closed, I figured the 24-hour Walmart down the road would be my best bet. It was one of those late-night stops you don't really think twice about, until something makes you wish you had. The parking lot was practically empty when I pulled in, just a handful of scattered cars under the dim lights. The store itself was dead quiet when I walked inside. I only spotted a couple of other shoppers drifting through the aisles, but otherwise it felt deserted, which I honestly expected at that hour. I made my way to the back corner of the store to grab some yogurt. That's when I noticed him. A man was standing near the shelves, completely still, his eyes locked directly on me. At first, I thought maybe he recognized me from somewhere. But as I got a better look, I realized I didn't know him. I'd never seen him before in my life. Still, I gave him a polite nod and muttered a quick, "Hey." He didn't react. No nod, no blink, no change in his expression. Just that unsettling, blank stare locked onto me. The longer I stood there, the more unnerved I felt. His face was completely expressionless, yet somehow, it radiated something off. I grabbed my yogurt and quickly moved on, telling myself he was probably just weird. Maybe something was wrong with him. But as I left the aisle, I heard footsteps behind me. I glanced back, and sure enough, he was following me. His pace was slow, steady, never rushing, but never falling far behind either. My heart rate picked up. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just some dumb prank, or maybe I was overthinking it. Either way, I only needed a couple more items. I grabbed them as quickly as I could, all the while feeling his eyes on me from a short distance behind. By the time I made it to the self-checkout, he was still trailing me. About 20 or 30 feet back, keeping his distance, but never disappearing. I considered telling one of the workers, but something in me, maybe stubbornness, maybe fear, told me to just keep my head down, finish up, and get the hell out of there. I paid for my groceries, bagged them, and made my way toward the exit. The automatic doors slid open, and the cool night air hit me as I stepped out into the mostly empty parking lot. That's when I heard the footsteps again, and they were closer now. I quickened my pace, the bags in my hands swinging awkwardly as I tried to walk as fast as possible without outright sprinting. But then, he started running. The sound of his footsteps pounding the pavement behind me snapped my nerves. I broke into a full sprint, fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking as I approached my car. The bags made it harder to get a good grip, but I finally yanked the door open, jumped inside, and slammed it shut. My heart was hammering as I locked the doors. The man reached my car just seconds later. Only now, his blank stare was gone, replaced with a wide, unsettling smile, one that stretched unnaturally across his face, wild and manic. He yanked at the door handle, then slammed his fists against the window, his eyes wide and frenzied. I didn't stick around to see what else he planned to do. I started the car, threw it in reverse, and sped out of that lot as fast as I could. The last thing I saw in the rearview mirror was him standing there, grinning like some kind of lunatic. I haven't been back to that Walmart since. And honestly, I don't think I ever will. I had planned to stop by Walmart to grab a quick birthday card for a friend. It was supposed to be one of those simple in-and-out trips, nothing more than a few minutes. I pulled into the parking lot, found a spot, and headed inside. The store wasn't very crowded, but there were a handful of shoppers wandering around, as you'd expect. I made my way straight to the greeting card section, which was located near the center of the store. The aisle was empty when I arrived. I took my time flipping through the cards, reading the cheesy jokes and sappy messages, trying to find one that wasn't completely awful. I was focused on the task, lost in thought, when suddenly, I heard a voice directly behind me. "What are you looking at?" I jumped. I hadn't realized anyone else had entered the aisle. I turned around and found a man standing less than a foot away from me. He was roughly my height but significantly older, with graying stubble on his chin and a worn-looking baseball cap pulled low over his head. His eyes locked onto mine, and for several seconds, he just stared, wearing the creepiest grin I've ever seen. I forced a polite smile and explained that I was just picking out a birthday card. But the man didn't back off. Instead, he kept that unsettling smile plastered on his face for a few seconds longer, then asked, "You going to a party? Am I invited?" His words sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't playful or funny. It was weird, unsettling, way too forward. I laughed nervously, desperate to end the conversation. The card I had in my hand suddenly seemed good enough. I told him I was in a hurry and needed to get going, then turned to leave the aisle. But he followed. "Okay, let's go," he muttered, keeping pace beside me as I walked. My heart started racing. Did he really think he was coming with me? I quickened my steps, heading straight toward the front of the store and the self-checkouts. But the man stayed right behind me, matching my pace. As I neared the checkout area, my gut told me walking out to the parking lot with him tailing me was a terrible idea. At the last second, I changed direction, turning sharply and heading down a different aisle toward the side of the store where they sold makeup, personal care items, and other odds and ends. I hoped the sudden detour would confuse him, that he'd give up and leave me alone. But he didn't. I glanced back and saw him trailing after me, looking mildly puzzled by my change of direction, but determined to follow. I kept walking, weaving through aisles, finally reaching the back corner of the store where the auto parts section was. That's when I spotted an employee stocking shelves nearby. Relieved, I approached him and blurted out that a man had been following me and wouldn't leave me alone. As I spoke, I heard the man behind me begin to protest, loudly denying everything as the employee stepped toward him. The distraction was all I needed. I slipped away quickly, ducking into another aisle and circling toward the middle of the store. I stayed low, keeping an eye out for him as I worked my way back toward the front. I figured with the employee involved now, the guy would either leave or get the message. But I was wrong. Just as I reached the front aisles, the same man suddenly jumped out from around a corner, cutting me off. I have no idea how he got ahead of me, but there he was grinning, eyes wide, blocking my path. Pure fear surged through me. I screamed and bolted in the opposite direction, weaving through aisles, not daring to look back. Luckily, my scream startled him enough that he didn't immediately chase after me. An employee near the front heard the commotion and rushed over, asking what was happening. Within moments, store security arrived, but by then, the man had already run off. Apparently, when the first employee confronted him, he panicked and made a break for the exit. They called security and even the police, but the guy slipped out before anyone could stop him. It turned into a whole scene: police reports, employees checking the security footage, but unfortunately they never caught him. Needless to say, I haven't set foot in a Walmart since. Right after I graduated high school, I picked up a part-time job as a cashier at a local big box store. It wasn't exactly exciting, but it paid the bills. Most days were uneventful. I'd stand at my register, scanning items, exchanging small talk, and dealing with the occasional rude customer or quirky shopper. For the most part, it was pretty routine, but one particular evening still lingers in my mind. It was a late afternoon shift that stretched into the evening hours. Things started off normal enough, a steady stream of customers coming through my line, nothing out of the ordinary. That is, until I noticed him. Or rather, I didn't notice him at first. It wasn't until he was the next person in line that I realized someone unusual had walked up. The man was dressed head to toe in solid black hoodie, black pants, and what made my stomach sink, a black ski mask covering most of his face. This wasn't around Halloween or anything festive, so it immediately struck me as off. At first, I told myself maybe this was just some odd fashion choice or he was cold, who knows. I figured he'd have something to purchase, so I kept scanning items for the person ahead of him. But when it was his turn, he didn't place anything on the conveyor belt. Instead, he walked straight up to the counter, right in front of me, and just stood there, silent, still, staring. The only part of his face visible were his eyes, cold and unblinking, and I noticed his hands were covered by black gloves. He had no shopping cart, no basket, nothing to buy. It was like he had shown up for no other reason than to stand there, watching me. Trying to keep things professional, I asked if he needed help finding something. No response. He didn't even flinch. Some of the people in line behind him chuckled, assuming it was some weird prank or joke. I forced a nervous smile, unsure whether to laugh along or feel genuinely creeped out. The guy didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. I asked again if he planned to purchase anything. Still nothing. Then, after a long, awkward pause, he took a single step closer to me. It wasn't a friendly step. It felt invasive, unsettling, enough to send a jolt of nerves through me. But just as quickly, he stepped back, turned, and walked right out of the store. At first, I honestly thought it had to be some bizarre prank. I even laughed it off and finished ringing up customers, telling myself it broke up the monotony of an otherwise dull shift. By the time I clocked out and headed home, I already had a weird story to share with my parents over dinner. But that wasn't the end of it. A few nights later, I found myself back at the register for another closing shift. It was quiet. Those last couple hours always dragged on with only a few straggling customers here and there. The store was nearly empty. I was zoning out, counting down the minutes, when my eyes drifted to the entrance, and my heart skipped a beat. There he was again. Same guy. Same black clothes. Same ski mask. But this time it felt different. The playful atmosphere from last time was gone. No customers behind him laughing. No crowded store to make me feel secure. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint echo of distant beeping from other registers. I tried to play it cool, forcing a polite smile. I greeted him, asked if he needed help. But, just like before, he said nothing. His stare locked onto me, unmoving, unreadable, as he walked up to my counter again. The seconds ticked by painfully slow. I faked another awkward chuckle, but it quickly died in my throat. The longer he stood there in silence, the heavier the air felt. I finally asked, more firmly this time, what exactly he was doing. Still no answer. No movement. After what felt like an eternity, he simply turned and walked out of the store, again, without buying a single thing. The rest of my shift passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I just wanted to get to my car and go home. But when I finally clocked out and stepped into the dark parking lot, the uneasy feeling in my chest turned into full-blown dread. There, parked right next to my car, was another vehicle, engine idling, and sitting behind the wheel was him. Same black clothes, same mask, his eyes fixed on me through the windshield. Every alarm bell in my head was blaring. I didn't hesitate. I spun around and marched straight back into the store, locking the door behind me. I wasn't about to find out what he wanted, or worse, where he intended to follow me. I stayed inside for nearly half an hour, pacing near the employee area, watching the parking lot from the window. Eventually, his car was gone. After making sure the coast was clear, I rushed to my car and drove straight home, heart racing the whole way. I never saw him again after that, but even now, years later, I still wonder, who's that guy? And what exactly did he want?